right, welcome into the Clapp Trap. We have a special interview today with Derek Brown, or as he is affectionately known for FantasyPros, the website, the podcast, the writer, everything that you do for him. It's D-Bro, a fantasy analyst. I know that you probably don't want to have me saying expert because, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, go along with that topic, but I think that he's got a lot of great information along with the fantasy football, with the season coming up here. We're all getting excited about just all the different football topics that can be going on. Obviously the Patriots for me specifically, but I personally just had my own fantasy football draft over the weekend, and there's a lot of questions that I have pertaining to not only my own team, which I'm going to try and hold back on because I could never take any bad news about how badly I drafted personally. But I want to get into a lot of great topics with you all around fantasy. But first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank y'all for having me. This is going to be a blast. Any chance I get to sit here and talk ball, literally anytime, it's going to be a good time. I just love it so freaking much.
Yeah, it's great. And I've seen you. I mean, you just had a tweet the other day that said, I just can't wait for the regular season to start. Like that's all I care about right now. We're so close to it. I mean, you got preseason, and that's a lot of things to talk about and everything going on with that. But like I said, we're always focused kind of on the fantasy side of things along with the regular season side of things. And I wanted to get into it. So I got to ask, how long have you been participating in fantasy football, and how long have you been writing about fantasy football?
I first got into fantasy. I don't remember the exact year, although I do remember a horrible trade I made. Because the first year that I was in it, I drafted Doug Martin and traded him away at the middle of the season. I don't even know what I got back, like a box of rocks. I have no clue. And then proceeded to watch him just absolutely smash down the stretch as I didn't go to the playoffs. And I think I got like second to last in that league. So fun times.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are things that, like, as you kind of get into fantasy, you remember the bad things that you did as well as the good. So, that was one of my first experiences with fantasy. But from a writing standpoint, I want to say it was probably 6 years ago. 6 years ago in May, my first article was live on a now defunct site for content. And honestly, we had just moved. I moved to another state for a job and had a wild hair. Honestly, I'd never been a writer. If you had known me in high school and college, I think I've probably read maybe, I'm kind of a fraud because anybody on the YouTube can see all these books behind me. I don't, I'm not a reader.
Fair enough.
That's my wife. So maybe I'm a little bit of a fraud, but as far as from the writing standpoint, I just had a wild hair. I was like, you know, I love fantasy. I'd loved it since I ever got into it, the first league with college buddies, and stuck with it. And we had just moved to I actually just moved for a job to another state, and I decided I was going to buy like some dirt cheap Chromebook, which I had been writing on all the way up until this year. And I was like, you know, I love football. I love fantasy. I'll try my hand at this, you know, and see where it goes. And it's been crazy. It's been a long, winding road. 6 years later, stopped doing the nursing thing. I was a full-time nurse and been a fantasy writer full-time for the last going on 3 years.
Wow. Yeah, no, and I mean, you seem to be building a good audience too. You're starting to get into a lot of great things. Obviously, like I said, I mentioned the FantasyPros website that you do that, podcasting, everything along those lines. So a lot of good things coming your way and from you too. So yeah, tough to remember the guys like the muscle hamster that you get away from your team there, and all of a sudden he goes on a run. And it is funny how you kind of remember the bad things a lot more sometimes than you do the good stuff. But yeah, that's an amazing run there, and I'm sure you're loving everything that you're getting to do now at this point. Would you say that you feel like you enjoy doing the podcasting more, the writing more? Is it just kind of a mix of all of it that's just great? Or I know it's hard to pick.
It's a mix of all of it. I think every bit of content has its ups and downs as far as from an enjoyment. I really like all of it, and that's one of the things that getting into all this, I've really tried hard to be able to do all the different mediums, whether it's writing, whether it's video, radio, all that kind of stuff, because it's important. You know, we're all different, and like I talked about, I made jokes about like I don't read for a hobby. I don't read books and stuff, but certain people, everybody consumes content differently. So it's whether you're watching YouTube videos, you're reading an article, you know, you're listening to a show. We all consume content and just have different hobbies, and we consume content differently. So I want to be able to be well-rounded and honestly be able to fit whatever, you know, whatever somebody's palate is for doing that.
Right. No, that's a great way to do it. Have a good, well-rounded sense of things. I think that's the best way. And so you got to collect your information somewhere. Obviously, you participate in fantasy football leagues, I would assume. How many do you normally participate in per season? And would you say that there's a limit or too much? What's overkill?
Oh, overkill up until this season was basically the name of the game. You enter the off season, especially if you do a lot of dynasty leagues like I do. You enter the off season, you're like, okay, I'm not gonna start any more leagues, and then somehow you get the itch, and everybody wants to do a startup, and everybody wants to do a draft, and you're finding ways to pass the off season time, and you know, whether it's best ball drafts and stuff like that. Like I'd say I've been in anywhere close to like 30 leagues before. I'm definitely not in that many now. And a lot of it just comes to we all have bandwidth. There's only so many hours in the day. And with work and 3 kids and all that kind of stuff, there's, you know, I prioritize trying to give advice. I prioritize my content over just my own leagues. So I've since cut it down to 10. I only have like 1 or 2 redraft leagues I'm a part of. A lot of it's dynasty, and even a lot of those are best ball leagues. So a lot of my Saturdays and Sundays and things like that are tied up in content, tied up in shows. So really going through, I just don't have the time to go through 30 leagues and set lineups and all that kind of stuff anymore, even though I still want to play fantasy. That's, you know, whether you're making content or watching things, we all want a little bit of skin in the game. And so, yeah, I mean, I still have to have that because it's the whole reason I got into doing this. So I'm still going to keep doing it.
Yeah, it's an addiction, a good addiction, I think. Though it's a good place to put your energy. I enjoy it a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of people that do out there, and I'm talking with Derek Brown, or as they know him as D-Bro from the Fantasy Pros website right now, who also was a 2020 DFS Writer of the Year finalist, which I wanted to shout out. That's a great honor to be even mentioned along those kind of lines. You do a lot of great work here, and as you were just saying, you do a lot of different types of leagues. You do dynasty leagues and things like that. Do you have a preference? Do you like the standard league over the dynasty? Do you like keeper leagues? What's normally what you would lean towards?
I honestly, a lot of it's dynasty these days. I just don't have the bandwidth to do all the redraft and setting of the lineups and stuff. I think the only redraft league I'll probably have this year is Scott Fishbowl, and after that, it's mostly dynasty leagues. Just because I love the year-round aspect of it. For my redraft kind of itch to scratch, I've transitioned to more just doing best ball drafts instead of doing redraft leagues where I'm setting the lineups. So between that and honestly, I mean, you talked about the DFS stuff. I've shifted more from redraft into dynasty, and a lot of it's now betting props and doing DFS, probably more than anything, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, I mean there's a lot of different options for a lot of different people out there depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, I've been trying to convince my league to go closer and closer to the dynasty style for a while now, but some people don't like that style. They want to kind of do the redraft, not have to think about it year round and things like that. But there's many questions that come up. Like I said, my own league, we got a lot of back and forth. I run my own league as the commissioner. That's always the tough spot because you got a lot of people complaining about a lot of things. And I got to bring up one of our things that we mostly complain about. The league is pretty split on it. What do you think about having kickers in the leagues? What do you think about having defenses in the fantasy football leagues? Are you pro? Are you against?
I mean, I treat kickers and defenses just like I replaceable commodities. I don't honestly, like most of my leagues, if it's all dynasty, we don't have kickers, we don't have defense. If I do redraft, I prefer to play it that way just because there is, I mean, obviously you could do research and things like that, but you could do all the research you want to, and a defense could give you 2 points one week, can give you 25 points the next week. Same thing with kickers. The volatility is massive there. And it's there is a certain amount of research that you can do, but still the volatility outkicks that 9 times out of 10.
Right.
And it's really just luck. So I'm totally fine with not having either in leagues that I participate in.
Fair. That's a fair point. A lot of the stuff that I hear a lot of the time about that as we're having our arguments and things like that. One of the outcomes that I thought maybe, and I usually go through one specific site, which they don't have this option for yet, but if there was ever an option to kind of combine both of them, put the defenses and the kickers of one team, so you just get Baltimore's special teams unit or something like that. You get all the points all together. I think that would be a cooler way to kind of mix things up there, make a little bit more strategy to it. But I get it. There is a lot of luck involved with that kind of stuff, right? So that makes things tough. But there are other styles of leagues, obviously, too, out there. And you say that you do ones that don't normally have the kicker or the defense. So do you participate in any of the 2 quarterback leagues or the super flex type leagues? And how do you feel about those ones, one way or the other?
Yeah, most of my leagues are super flex. I think that more leagues, even casual ones, are moving to that type of format, and they really should. I mean, we can all talk about 1 quarterback redraft leagues and we're waiting on quarterbacks. I think that, there is something to be said for the rushing upside of quarterbacks now, obviously, and that giving you an extra edge. So I will gravitate toward quarterbacks early, but I love super flex leagues. I love the strategy behind it, especially from a dynasty aspect, a roster build aspect, and even redraft. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And a lot of this comes down to when I get questions about Superflex, especially from a redraft perspective, there's different ways to approach it. And every league is different. And some of knowing your league mates and some of the awesome tools we have over FantasyPros, like our draft intel, which basically you sync your league and you can kind of see what people's tendencies have been over the last few years, how they draft, what positions they draft, what they covet, what they punt, things like that. It's massive, especially in a format like Superflex, because you can try to kick the can down the road and get quarterbacks late. But if you push that too far, then you're really messed over. As well as the other side of the coin, if you go quarterbacks heavy early, then maybe you're missing out on some of those top tier wide receivers, running backs, what have you. So I love the strategy aspect of it. And honestly, really the game of chicken versus all of your league mates, especially in these bigger formats. Like if you're in a 14 team, 16 team league versus even 12.
Right. Yeah. No, it's even with the 12 team leagues, I've thought about it with mine as well. Because like you said, at some point, you're only in a 12 team league, you're only getting really the top 12 quarterbacks and not really utilizing any of the other quarterbacks in the entire league. There's so much more left to be involved. And so much more strategy, like you said. It affects the draft. It affects the way you pick people up throughout the season, that kind of stuff too. So it's definitely something to think about out there for any people looking for some way to change their fantasy league in some way. That's a good one to think about. And once again, I'm talking with Derek Brown here of FantasyPros, and we're talking all about fantasy football right now. I've got my league, and one of the ways that I've been trying to spice up my league recently to make sure that people are more involved, especially towards the end of the season, is to add in a weekly prize of highest points gets a certain amount of money each week. Do you like that? I can already see you kind of shaking your head. Do you like that kind of a thing being added to a league? And do you think it's something that leagues without it should think about just for more competitiveness?
Oh, absolutely. Anything that you can do that's going to keep people invested, because the reality of it is that sometimes when you get to week 5, week 6, teams just start, with 1 win, 0 wins and stuff, people will check out, unless they're heavily invested. So any kind of perks that you can add to either weekly scoring, if you go the route of, okay, the bottom 3 finishers, have to do this or that or whatever, have to wear a dunce cap, whatever you're going with. I prefer that, if you do have money invested in it, which most of us we're paying buy-ins, money's involved.
Right.
That if you have those incentives, I mean, obviously everybody wants to win the money, but to give those types of incentives on a weekly basis keeps people invested even through the playoffs and what have you. I mean, so yeah, I love that, because if not, you're looking at a 12 team league becomes a 16 league or a 17 league by week 5 or week 6. And that's, nobody wants that. You want to be able to stay invested. And that's really where the fun comes in if you're into it all year. And so even if somebody starts out 1-5, 0-5, 0-6, they're still in it to win it the entire year. And they're like, look, like, I might not win the league, but I can make my buy-in back. Heck, I can maybe make some more money on the side by just staying invested, and I'm going to have more fun doing it.
Oh, yeah. And you always get those teams that come in hot late who did have the tough start. Maybe an injury or two happened. All of a sudden they come on strong late, and they're at least making somebody else's playoff hopes hurt the entire time. And then they can try and win some money too. So I think that it's really important. And since I've added that in, I think that you get a lot more competitiveness out of everybody going into the league. And so that's the other thing. You keep building every single year. You get usually a same group of guys as you keep competing with them, and everybody gets more into it. They're doing more research. They're looking into more players that they can get into. They're reaching out to the pros, the fantasy pros, right, and trying to figure out what's going on with the league going into the year. So I got to ask, who are some of the guys going into this season that you feel are some sleeper picks that you could really give out to the people who haven't drafted yet at this point?
I mean, obviously, this part of the year, you're monitoring training camp news and things like that. And then, especially if you're doing drafts right now, ADPs don't correct as quickly as they should. So there's a lot of running backs that I feel like are going to go a little bit, not say under the radar, but they're not going to be drafted quite as high as they should be. The low-hanging fruit there is Damien Pierce. He's going to be the lead back in Houston. He has a fantastic 3-down skill set. Loved him ever since I watched him at Senior Bowl. As a player that, I mean, his pass protection skills were the best in this NFL draft class. And with that, he's going to be Davis Mills' best friend from week 1. So I love him, even regardless of the context of that offense. Other ones, if you're playing in PPR leagues, people are not, they're not sexy names, but guess what? We care about fantasy points, and these guys are going to score them. So the last picks of your draft, whether you're going to go Ty Montgomery or Amir Abdullah, we're looking at the similar type roles here. So we've seen pass catching backs succeed in New England, and that type of usage is going to be fluent for the Raiders. It's going to be fluent for the Patriots still. So these are the last picks of your draft. And I'm not telling you that like you're going to have to spend up for these guys. Where I'm talking about, you don't have to draft a defense or a kicker with your last picks unless your league settings require you to. Right. Take 2 of these flyers, take 2 of these running backs at the last part of your drafts, and especially in PPR leagues. I mean, we saw James White last year in a small sample before he got hurt, RB9, RB23 over those first two games. So in both of these offenses, the passing volume could be there. And so you're not paying anything to get access to possible ceilings and pass game roles for these running backs. So if we're going super deep, and I know a lot of people don't, didn't expect me to say names as deep as that, or maybe as gross as that. Some other guys, like as far as like sleepers for wide receivers, I still love Sky Moore. I think that Juju Smith-Schuster is over the hill. I think that Sky Moore is the do-it-all player for Kansas City. He has a skill set that's unlike anybody else on that depth chart. MVS is a field stretcher, a 9-route runner. Juju Smith-Schuster is a slot-only zone beater. You have Mecole Hardman, who, I mean, his best skill at this point in his career is carrying everybody else's Gatorade, their pads from place to place. So I love Sky Moore. I will heavily invest in him, and that's really more of a blanket thing. Like every single year, we come up with these notions in our head, and we say, we try to poke holes in all of these rookie wide receivers, and we say, yeah, but his quarterback's not that good. Yeah, but what about this guy and this guy? And it's like, over the last 2 to 3 years, we keep looking back and we say, oh, wow. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like won people leagues last year. Jamar Chase at one point last offseason, there was a narrative he couldn't catch a football with white lines on it.
Right.
And we keep talking ourselves out of rookie wide receivers. So if I could say one thing just as an overarching rule, be higher on rookie wide receivers than your league mates, and it should pay off, especially down the stretch run. Once these guys get going, you could see league winning types like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, like Jamar Chase the entirety of the season. So I think Sky Moore fits the bill for that, but you can go that route with a lot of these rookies. Like, I still love Drake London. I don't care about Marcus Mariota. He's actually looked awesome in preseason. So if he plays league average, Drake London is going to get a ton of targets. He could sniff a 25, 26% target share this year, and nobody should be surprised by that. And Kyle Pitts can still eat. So, picking out a few different sleepers. I mean, I consider and just talk on and on and on and on about more players, but those are probably the ones at the top of my list right now.
That's great. That's what we want to hear. I love the fact you brought up London. I ended up picking him in my draft, so I feel good now. You're making me feel good. But what I gotta say though, there are obviously picks out there that don't make you feel too good. One of the ones, even though I got him very late, I got him. I don't know what did I got him in, like the 13th or 14th round. I ended up getting Tyler Lockett, who last year I swore I would never go with Tyler Lockett ever again in my entire life, but he was just sitting there by himself at the end, and I'm thinking, hey, at least at the very worst, weeks 1 and 2, he's going to go absolutely bananas, and then from then on out, I'll have to get rid of him. But are there any other guys that you're not feeling too high on going into this year? Are you down on any specific big names or anything like that?
I mean, there's a laundry list of players. I mean, we could talk about the running back dead zone for days. I know that Jerry Jones is still enamored with Ezekiel Elliott, but I will not find myself drafting him very much this year. Other running backs that I'm just out on, even at a value, Antonio Gibson is falling down draft boards, and you could see some drafts he'll go in the 8th, 9th, maybe 10th round at some spots. I still don't want to draft him. And everybody says, well, at some point in the draft, he becomes a value, right? And I'm like, no, he can become maybe a more shiny trap play. There's just some players where like, everybody tries to twist the coin and say, okay, well, at some point you're going to draft him. No, there's some players I'm just out on. So you can throw Antonio Gibson into that bucket. You could throw Robert Woods into that bucket. I'm not interested in over 30 wide receivers coming off an ACL that had declining efficiency metrics that now land on a run first offense. Right. No, thank you. Other running backs that really are, again, trap plays that, whether it's efficiency, whether it's new offensive systems, whether it's, they're not going to reprise these workhorse roles that they've had in the past. I don't want anything to do with Josh Jacobs this year. I've already talked about Amir Abdullah. If you want to go with one running back from that backfield, it would be Abdullah and not Jacobs. And David Montgomery. I can't understand why people are drafting him still as a top 24 running back. Matt Nagy is gone. Matt Eberflus did not draft David Montgomery. He does not have any ties. He has no allegiances. He does not care if David Montgomery is happy or whatever, especially considering David Montgomery is going to be a free agent after this year. So I honestly would not be surprised if Chicago, if their injuries in training camp in the early part of the season, if they ship David Montgomery off, if he's a trade candidate and they just say, look, we're going to try to get, instead of letting him walk, we're going to try to get any kind of draft pick that we can, even if it's a 5th rounder or what have you, because it's better equity than getting nothing. So those are a lot of the different guys. And just one wide receiver to hit on real quick. Amari Cooper is still being drafted as a top 24, top 30 wide receiver. I'm out. Deshaun Watson, we could talk about that, but we know he's going to miss time this year. Right. Even regardless, even if Watson was playing the full season, I still think that Amari Cooper is getting drafted far too high. I mean, even in a better offense last year with Dak Prescott throwing in the ball, he still wasn't a top 24 wide receiver. He was wide receiver 25. His efficiency metrics have dropped in each of the last 3 to 4 seasons. And now you team him with Jacoby Brissett for almost all of the fantasy regular season. And you marry that with his decline, like increasing age, declining efficiency. I cannot draft him where he's going right now.
Yeah, Yeah, that's another one that's a tough situation. Obviously, not having the starting quarterback would be one thing, but on top of the fact that, like you said, he's just clearly declining anyways, that's going to make it a whole big problem for him overall. And once again, I'm talking with Derek Brown, who is part of Fantasy Pros, a great writer for them, podcaster, everything. So go check out his stuff. We'll get to your socials and where to find you in a little bit here, but for we're talking fantasy football, obviously, and not everybody can be a fantasy pro. Some people are just getting into it. Some are starting off, and it's hard when you jump into this jungle and you got some people who think that they're ruthless out there and they're just taking you for a ride every single time in the draft. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, draft this guy, and then they take a different guy just because. Do you have any good strategies for anybody who's new to it, who's trying to get in there? Do you think that they should focus on acquiring running backs first, acquiring wide receivers? Is there anything you can give to the new fantasy football player as a go-to direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking from just a macro perspective, top down, in the Cliff Notes version of it, I would say out of the first 2 rounds, I want to walk away with at least one running back. And I will go, I still love going RB to start a lot of redraft leagues because the running backs are just, they're awesome. And we see league winners come from those spots. So walk out of the first 2 rounds with at least one running back. And once you get past the first 2 rounds, it's really time to, for the next 3 to 4 rounds, just hammer the wide receiver position. We see, again, league winning types come out of that spot. Like Cooper Kupp last year was a 3rd, 4th round pick. And we have 2nd-year players, we have upside players, and even good guys from, Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, all these different guys that are coming from really good offenses that can finish as wide receiver ones are going in the 3rd and 4th rounds of drafts. So out of the first 2 rounds, get yourself one running back. Rounds 3 through about 6, hammer the wide receiver position. Maybe grab a tight end in there somewhere, and you need to be targeting quarterbacks that can run. They're the difference makers. They're the league winners for all your different formats, and so you need to target guys that have that rushing upside, because even if the quarterbacks are stationary passers, they can still be really, really good. And the outcomes of them even getting above, say, QB7 is really tough. Like Matthew Stafford, fantastic year last year. And the guy threw for 40 touchdowns, 5K. He was still only at the back end of QB. He was QB 11. Joe Burrow, awesome year last year, QB 10 in fantasy points per game. But you're looking at all these other guys that have league winning upsides, difference maker upsides like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Trey Lance. That 4-pack of quarterbacks are the ones that you need to be going after. And really, if you don't want to pay up for Lamar Jackson in, say, the 3rd, 4th round, take the guy at the end of that tier. So I find myself, I love Jalen Hurts, but the top 3 for that would be Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, and Trey Lance for your fantasy leagues. Get guys that run and they can win your leagues.
Yeah, that's that's a good way to start it off. Because I think that it does get a little intimidating sometimes when you get to that point, and you don't know what to do, and everybody around you looks like they know what they're doing, and you're just sitting there like, what am I supposed to do next? So I think it's good to kind of give that a little bit of insight to the newer players out there. But one of the big moments, at least for my league, and I'm sure for a lot of other team leagues, is the actual draft. That's what starts off the year. That's what gets you going. That's how you create your team right. Do you have any preference on in-person type drafting versus online drafting? Do you like one more than the other, would you say?
I mean, honestly, I like both, because you can set up your leagues where you're doing the online draft, but you're all meeting up at somebody's house, So I think that either way you're going, fantasy football is all about camaraderie. It's all about community. It's all about smack talking to whoever's in your league and just having a good time. So whether you're doing, you're getting a draft board, you're doing stickers, all that kind of stuff, or you're going with an online draft, meet up at like Buffalo Wild Wings, meet up at somebody's house, get food, get booze, enjoy the night, and have a good time with your friends while you're drafting a league. It's the one time of the year. You only get one time of the year to draft your teams, and everybody gets together. Enjoy it. I mean, that's why we're all playing the game, to sit here and have fun.
Right. Yeah, no, I love it. It's always in person for our group, and yeah, it makes it so much better. Everyone's looking forward to that one day where we get everybody together. Plus, it's a great excuse as we get older to get the guys together and really be able to have a good time, right? You don't always get a bunch of big group events out there, so why not get together for that? All right, I know I gotta get you going here in a little bit, but I did want to ask you one more thing. We do kind of talk about some betting tips and everything like that on the show sometimes here. You mentioned that you sometimes go outside of just the fantasy football to do some bets and things like that. Do you have any futures out there right now that you're really liking going into the football season or anything else on your plate?
Yeah, I mean, I got in early. I've got some. I love the Eagles this year, so I've got some long shot odds on them, both to win the division, Super Bowl futures, Jalen Hurts MVP futures. I've got some other ones that are hanging out in the wind as far as division winners or over when the win totals were a little bit sexier earlier in the offseason. Bet the over on wins for the Detroit Lions, and then a lot of other prop lines. Yep. Just chasing some of these, because books, and that's really what you need to be attacking. You want to get closing line value. You want to get in on these lines early. If you're just now getting to the books, a lot of these things have been cooked, are juiced, and so you're really not going to get the best value for it. So what I would say is if you're really kind of getting into betting and stuff like that, especially new people into the space, because new states are coming online, new states are getting whether it's brick and mortar type of betting like books where you can actually go to a place, or you're using DraftKings or another sports book app and stuff like that. It's really getting in early and trying to shop the best lines. So whether you're consuming content from myself, other writers, and all of our fantastic team at Betting Pros, I know college football is about to kick off right now. Our new college guru, Thor Nystrom, is fantastic. He is one of the best college bettors in the business. So if you're just now getting into betting, you need to be tailing his picks. You need to find him on social media, and you need to be following what he's doing at Betting Pros, because again, you need to get in early, and he is one of the sharpest people out there. So that's honestly my recommendation. You want to get into betting right now? Follow Thor, bet college, and he's going to teach you a lot of stuff so you can start betting into the NFL once it starts too.
Love that. Love that. Always need the good tips and tricks and guys to follow and things like that. And once again, or lastly, here I'm with Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros. Just want to give you a minute to shout out any of your socials and everything to find you, because I think, once again, you got some great info as well. Let's not just pump up the other guys. Let's get what you got too. So what are all your socials, and where can they find you?
Yeah, all my content is over at Fantasy Pros, so fantasypros.com. And that's really covering this year. I'm going to be writing up redrafts, still doing DFS, some prop bets, things like that. So that's where you can find all my content, or follow me on Twitter at @dbro_FFB. I am on the main podcast for Fantasy Pros 3 to 4 times a week. And really, it's just, it's all things Fantasy Pros, man. We have a mountain of content, a ton of talented writers and contributors for the site. I love doing our podcast. If you like listening about football and you like fun, which we all do, you don't want to listen to anything that's boring and you're at the end of it, you're like, well, I learned a lot, but
right.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
So our podcast, I think, is honestly one of the best in the business. So tune into that, and really thank you for having me on the show. This was a blast. And I feel like whether you're experienced or not, or you're just not getting into it, we covered a ton on this show.
Love it. That's what I was hoping for, and that's why I brought you on here, and I really do. I appreciate you coming on. Maybe we'll be able to talk in the future as well.
Oh, anytime. If I've got the time and you need somebody to talk, more than happy to talk football, fantasy, and all things in between.
Love to hear it. Well, that's Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros. Go find him. Like he said, he's got some great content, and once again, appreciate you coming on to the show.
Absolutely.